All right, so we're wrapping up from that breakout session.
Yeah, I gotta even get the answer my question.
So that one I know, and I apologize that this one didn't go as long as some of the other breakout sessions, but I promised that I would not, I'm the long-winded one of everyone here, right? So I promised I wouldn't keep us all day long. But I'm curious. So I got to listen to some of the role plays and got to hear just reading through the follow-up questions. What do we experience from going through this KPA? What have we experienced so far? Mhm.
I found that the script helps keep you on track. So you know what's next and where to go through the process.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great thing to know that you have a guide, right? And we talk about this being a slow to hire process, right? There are certain elements to this, and this is what I will tell you, the less that you have to think about what you're doing next, the easier it is for you to pay attention to the person that you're talking to. The easier it is for you to decipher the information that they're providing, right? So as we talk about the stage that we go through, we've gone through verification, right? And you're going to want to continue to practice. As Alana says, we're just giving a snippet, right? But a lot of this comes with you digging in, you creating your action plan, and you reviewing. Each of you have this KPA to go through and review. Now it's just reading and being comfortable with it. So when the next person comes up, you're going to read and discover how they show up. It'll be easier, it will flow for you. So the next part of this very first meeting, right, is going through their thought process, right? Now the thought process to do this, we're roughly going to play 30 questions with it, right? So if we turn to page 21 of your packet. Again, what do we believe in Keller Williams? Models, systems, tools. So what do we think we're going to find on page 21? Another set of tools. If we're going to go through and find out someone's thought process, we want to have the questions in front of us to be able to ask them. I'd rather you not have to think about the questions to ask, but have them in front of you to go through. So when we ask these questions, we want it to be very conversational, right? So now from the candidate's perspective, they've had a phone screen. From the phone screening, they've taken the KPA, right? They've taken the assessment. And now they're in their very first meeting with you. They've had their assessment reviewed. They've heard a lot about themselves, which, let's be honest, a lot of us love to hear about ourselves, right? So they're already engaged and they're happy about what they've heard if they agreed with it, right? And if they didn't agree with it, they're probably a combative person, which they still agree, and they've got to have fun because they got to combat the whole report that's been there. So now we're going to dig into the second part of this first in-person interview. And that's the thought process. This is going to start going into some of those more traditional interview questions that we know, right? A great question, which is the very first one that's listed, is, would you ever read the first question for
Me?
Hmm?
Okay, what did you do to prepare? Sorry, what did you do to prepare for this interview?
What did you do to prepare for this interview? Why is that such a great question? It just shows you what people do to get in line, right? Shows you what people do to show up for you. But this lets you go into, what are we thinking about? Their thought process. What do they think would be necessary to come in, right? As I mentioned earlier, we look at it from a psychology standpoint. One, I'm reading the paper on a regular basis to find out what the mass public is thinking about and what they're doing. So that information I gave you on how to review a job description, what people are going through, what they're reading, what they're reviewing. Where did I get that from? I got that from one, experience going through it, but two, looking at research and looking at why did the resume, right? Why did resumes shift? Why did how we list job descriptions shift? And I like to find that information out because that's my thought process. If I know how it works, then it makes it easy for me to see someone who's already in that line. I start to get a little bit of insight by them. So this part of the process where we're going through and we're reading the thought process out, we are just literally asking them questions. We are writing down the answers. What we are not doing in this time frame, you are not showing up at all. What do I mean by that?
This is your time to learn about the person you're interviewing. So you're being quiet, you're listening, right?
Yep. This is all about your prospective candidate. This is not about you. Now, I struggle with this because I love to relate. right? And so when you say, hey, what are your strengths? My strength is I love to connect with people. I build great relationships. Man, you know what, I do too. We should be friends, right? But it's not about me. It's about going to the next question and finding this information out. And mind you, anybody who's ever been on an interview, how often have you been on an interview where they're just peppering you with questions? It's a normal process, right? But it's a discovery process. And now we're not just asking random questions to ask questions. Think about what we've done, right? There's two processes that we're doing in this first meeting. That process is doing what? First thing that we're doing is we're verifying their personality. That's what we went through with the KPA assessment. And the second part we're going through right now is their thought process. So while they may not understand the nature of the questions, you know exactly what you're asking and why. So guess what? We're going back into our groups. We are going to go through the thought process questions, all right? So when we break up in groups, I want each person to go through, ask 3 questions that you see there, switch to the next person, ask 3 questions, go back and forth. We'll take about 3 minutes as we go through this section, all right? All right, so we're wrapping up from that breakout session.
Oh, geez.
So, hey, you guys had a great one. I was kind of timing off of you guys. So what do we get from that? Going through 30 questions, a lot of questions. What do we get from that, from asking those questions?
A lot of good, I mean, it was good stuff, good information.
So, and I'm gonna pick on you guys a little bit, but in the questions that you asked, do you feel that you started to get an understanding of how Mike processes things and his thought process of how he accomplishes one goal to the next?
Yes, I got a lot of understanding of how he does things. I know. It almost seemed like he knew what the questions were before I asked them. Also, you know what I mean? Like he had good answers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and here's the thought process, right? And this is the part of, as I say, systems, models, tools.
Uh-huh.
The tools have been designed because these tools work. These questions work. These questions have been researched to make sure it's going to get a proper answer to come out. Doesn't necessarily say what answer they're going to give, but it's going to give an answer that one can be developed, one can be expanded upon, right? And so now you have a great insight to them. So let's think about what we've done in this process, right? So if we've been through this, we'll go from our standpoint, right? So from the agent or the business that's looking to hire, we've now created a job profile. We have our vision that's there. We created the job profile, we posted, or we will refer someone into our business, right? We reviewed that and we said the review process, if we're going through 30 resumes, we can do that in roughly 20 minutes, right? So we reviewed through the resumes. We played red light, green light. We discarded the ones that don't make sense, that didn't meet our hard stop items. Then we moved over. We said, all right, these are the people that we're going to go through and we're going to do a screening call with. In the screening call, we use the STAR technique, right? That screening call, 8 to 10 minutes to have a conversation, finding about how they show up in different situations, what they do with those tasks, what actions do they have, what were their results? Are there somebody we want to find out more about, or do we red light and say, no, we're not moving forward there? We've green lighted. We passed them out a KPA. They've completed this assignment for us, right? Also, think about this. You send a KPA out to somebody and they don't complete it, are they going to show up for your business? They won't show up for the interview. You know they're not going to show up for the business, right? Follow the steps. They review the KPA. You've invested no time just sending that out. Now you've reviewed the KPA. We did the verification in our first meeting, and in the end of that first meeting, we went through the 30 questions. So for you, you spent between an hour to 2 hours, depending on how long that initial meeting takes, in addition to the time to review through resumes, and then the 10-minute screening call. So all told, we might be 2 hours and 20 minutes invested in, 2 hours and 30 minutes. All of this at this point in time to make sure that we have a qualified candidate. From the candidate's perspective, they've invested what? An initial screen. They spent the 40 minutes during the KPA, and now they've had one great in-depth interview with you where they got value out of it. So now we're moving right along. If this person gets green lighted, we're gonna go to our next step. Our next step is, sorry, is setting up the second meeting.
Life story.
Yep. So that second meeting, we're going through and we're talking about their life story and their motivation, right? So time frame wise, we don't want to lose out on great talent, right? So we don't want to lose out on great talent. I think Scott said it earlier, a long process, slow to hire, you might lose out on somebody who's wonderful. Well, remember, think about that client's perspective. All they've been through is one initial meeting with you, and that initial interview was probably a great one because they heard a lot about themselves. And then they had the traditional interview questions that were asked in that 30-minute session. So now you're scheduled for the second interview. If that prospective client was going into one of the Fortune 50 companies or going through a hiring process that we send them through from staff management companies that we work for or created, they're now going to meet with the hiring manager, right? So they would have went through their first initial interview, that in person was a screening. The second one, they usually go with the hiring manager. Just so happens we're a smaller business. So they're coming in for their second interview, which they're accustomed to. That second interview just happens to be with you, right? But now we're not going to talk about the same things we talked about the first time, because the first one, I got to get a true understanding of how you think and make sure your personality is right for our business. And because of that, man, I think that this would be really great for us to sit down and go through our second interview where we can really expand upon you, hear a little bit more about you and your background, and then also make sure that our future goes along. That's your setup for the second interview. And in the second interview, now what we're covering the life story and the motivation, right? So when do we set up the second interview? The second interview, and I'll ask this to the group. What is a good time frame between the first interview and second interview to meet with you? Right, I'll ask you, and Suzette, I'll ask you, you've had experience, and I'm sure you've had where there's been multiple days, very short period. What tends to be the best from the first interview to the second?
I don't think there's like a right answer there. I think that it's the expectation that you set. So if I know that this person's the first person that I'm interviewing with 5 other people, and I know that it's going to take me until Friday to get through everyone, then I would set an expectation that I'll be in touch by Friday night at whatever time, and then we'll schedule it for next week. So I just set an expectation, and that usually helps. Sometimes it does take longer. Sometimes your day gets busy, you have to move an interview. So just setting realistic expectations. I don't think that they care as much how far apart it is. And if you let them know, like, hey, I'm interviewing a few candidates this week, like I'll get in touch Friday. And then we set up the next call. But usually it shouldn't take more than a week. I think the whole process for me from like call to like actually hiring takes about a month. So depending on your schedule, a week in between. Just really depends on how many people you want to get through each.
I mean, that actually is a great answer because you set the proper expectations to go through. If you're reviewing through your words, you have great talent, you don't want to miss them. 2 days, really, right? But if you set proper expectations, that could be an entire week. Mike, what was it, almost 2 months?
Yes.
Mine was a month and a half, yeah.
Yeah, if expectations are set up front, a candidate will wait. You're going through a process that's digging into them, and remind you, if you aren't making this process about you, if you're asking the questions the way they're listed, you're not giving your own personal story to those answers, then the whole time they've been with you, they've been expanding, they've built trust with you, they understand who you are, and they're going to be open to share, and they're going to be looking forward to what's going to come next. I'm curious to see what happens next, just because this has been a great process thus far. How many times we've interviewed somebody and they said that, like, this has been the most interesting process I've been through. I really enjoyed it. I'm just curious to see what's going to happen next, right? But that's what happens when you make it about them and you follow the script and you go through that process to ask them those questions without giving your own personal story to them. So we're going to do the same thing with that second meeting. Now we're going through their life story, right? Now, when we go through the life story, this can vary in time frame, right? Life story and motivational will be with the second meeting. Why this could vary in time frame is because if you have somebody who's 26 and you're going, or 21 going through their life story, it's probably going to be a little bit shorter than going through someone who's 71, who has a much more in-depth life story, right? So now as we go through it, we don't want to shortchange anything that happens. We don't want to shortchange their life story, but we want to dig through it, right? So now you're going to see that you want to allot enough time for this life story to commence and then for you to go into the motivation with that person, right? So what is our goal with this life story? We thought we did the verification process. That verification process, that actually told us their personality. The thought process showed us how they think. And now with the life story, this is going to go beyond what they've done. It's going to uncover their how, right? It's going to uncover what they did to accomplish the goals they did, how they did it, why they did it. That's what we're digging in, and that's what we want to see.
This is the most important one, I think, through my experience, because the resume ultimately is a lie. And it shows through this, exercise so much. They're like, oh, well, technically I wasn't working during this time because of so-and-so. Like, because, oh, well, there was a gap between here and here. What did you do? And then, oh, life happened. Okay, well, tell me more about that life. It gives you more of an insight into work life and not just work, which I think is interesting. And also, they just, resumes lie. This exercise will show you exactly what you're trying to look for. So this is the one you wouldn't want to skip.
This is the one you want to get to, and this is the one you want to dig in. I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, I had a candidate. I was curious to get to his life story. I didn't just because I didn't have the time, but I love the question, right? And so through their resume, they actually listed that they were an assistant coach of a college basketball team. I've been in different parts of the country. I just so happened to know the school that they said they were assistant head coach of. I had never heard their name before because I knew one of the coaches on that team. So now I'm curious to figure out how they're going to show up and what they're going to do. And I had time to play around that day. So they actually showed up very well on the phone screen. It's like, all right, well, maybe now we should go to the interview. I really just wanted to get to the life story because I really wanted to find out when were you at the school, right? And through the process, right? And this is where we start talking about facts. The resume ends up being a flat out lie, right? Going through the phone screening, something didn't show up right. But I just want to keep pushing through because I really just want to call that school and be like, yeah, somebody who's just representing themselves faultily. But then as we go through and now I look at the KPA, they basically combated everything that was there, not in a good way. And immediately it's like, all right, there's no need for me to waste my time, waste anyone else's, because you might have inadvertently said that, but come to find out, no, you're just a person who I'll just flat out call them a liar, right? But this is what the facts will go through. And sometimes I'd love to challenge things to see if they show up the correct way, or is this just a hypothesis that doesn't end up working out? But this will show you that the KPA showed them that exactly who he's going to be. The resume was a lie, and to Riley's point, going through this life story, this helps you dig in. This helps you get an understanding, right? How they show up, why they show up, when they show up. So what are we going through in this? There's going to be a few things that will pop up during a life story. I'm going to remind everyone that you are interviewing someone. And what that means is there are certain questions that you can and cannot ask. There are going to be things that your candidates will bring up that are going to be very personal. They're going to be relative to their specific life. And based upon the rules and regulations that OSHA and everyone else is, you are not going to be able to ask them certain questions. Their age, their gender, their sex now goes into it as well, right? Then there's the other one. Oh, and then their medical history. There's certain things you can and cannot ask and make a determination based on their medical history. But what you're going to find is in this life story, it will come up. It will come up over and over again. They will voluntarily bring it up. And when it happens, let them tell their story. There's just certain things that you're not going to dig deeper in, you won't ask about, but you can ask how they felt when that happened. You can ask different questions about how that affected them, but you can't make your determination based on those things, or you can't ask certain questions to pull that out. All right. So how this process gets set up. So to do the life story, there's a few things that you'll need, right? You're going to want, and let's turn page 26 inside of our guide. And this is going to give you all the steps that you need, right? So what it's going to tell you up front, you want to grab several different color markers and you want to grab a flip chart. You want to have your flip chart and you want to set your client or your prospective candidate right in front of the flip chart. You want them to get clear, focused, and have all the insight, no distractions. And what you're going to do, you're going to study the format that's here, but this is exactly what we're going to write down, right? To show you, I'm reading from the script. First thing you do, study your format. Next, check your mindset. You're here to stay objective. Again, this is not about you. This is about your candidate's life story. So remember, it's going to be fine if they bring up personal items, but you're interviewing them. You may not ask them about certain personal aspects that come, right? So now as we go through to conduct the interview, you're going to position this flip chart right in front of them. Stand next to the flip chart so you can see the candidate, and then you're going to write on the flip chart at the same time. Now using that blue or black marker, we're gonna write at the top of that flip chart. And for this example, Madison's professional biography, right? And on the left side, you're writing down event 1, start with education, right? Then you're gonna do this 3 or 4 more times down the page so we can have different events going through their life cycle. So remember, today is very interactive. So now we have the setup, we have our flip chart, we have the candidate sitting in front of us. We now have their education there. We are going to start asking them questions. So guess what we're jumping right back into? We're going right back to our groups. We're on page 27. And we are going to start reading through the script to go through a life story with the prospective candidate. All right. So everyone turn to page 27. I'm going to set you up with your breakout groups again. And we're going to just read through the script, right? So one person, you be the candidate. The other person, you're reading the script, going through, asking them the questions that are listed. I'm gonna give us roughly about 5 or 6 minutes, have one person go through. Don't worry if you don't get to participate or you get to ask the questions. We're coming right back with another activity and we'll get to switch sides on that stuff once we come back, all right? So I'm sending this to our breakout rooms and we'll have about 5 minutes to get started. So Lynn, when you go down and you go through what happened next, you're essentially jumping right back to the top and asking those same questions for whatever that next major life event is that they brought up.
Okay, so would you suggest, can I ask, like what year or anything? Like, how long ago did you start investing? or-
Yeah.
Okay, good.
When was that?
That's what I would normally ask.
Yep, because remember, you have your dates listed. You want to find out the dates, so you want to ask that information.
First house,
Yep.
you know what I mean?
Yep.
Um,
You're asking those questions in this because you want them to tell that story. You want them to give that information to expand upon, so you have that information. Remember, you're writing this on a flip chart as they're giving that answer. So you want to ask a follow-up because you want to make sure that you have enough information that's going to be there, right? So yeah, ask the follow-up questions. When you go back and you ask one and you get stuck, just go back to the top and ask those same questions for each item that they go through.
So can I ask you, would it be improper to ask him, like how much he spent for his first flip? Like for his first investment, like to show him his accomplishments? Or no?
It's a great question.
I mean, to
And
me, I think it would be.
it all depends on how it comes up.
Okay,
Right? Because you're asking those questions, but remember, you're going to come back and do motivational afterwards. There are going to be parts of this that lead together, right? And so you'll be able to show him what was enticing to him.
right.
Why was that a high? And he might tell you that, hey, because I made so much money on that flip, it changed my life. Then yeah, you can ask, well, how much was it that was made? And now when you go into motivation, you can start tying those things together.
Okay.
Excellent question. Excellent question.
So when was your first flip?
All right, so we just wrapped up with our next breakout session. And in this breakout session, it was interesting, right? So I gave you guys a little bit less of the detailed information to get started with, right? Because I want us to have the script in front of us and I wanted us to read through and have a little bit of the struggle of, let me see how to put this together, right? And then what you're able to find as you were going through was, okay, there is a little bit of attention that we have to pay to make sure we're asking the right question next, right? So let's just start with the school, right? So when did you finish your education and what happened that naturally flow, right? So we can ask, what were the dates that you finished, right? Then you can ask, just simple follow-up questions such as, what did you study while you were there? And now we can jump right back into our script. What were your highs? What were your disappointments? And we can ask those questions, but then anytime that we get to a point where they're finished with that life story, then where do we go next? We ask, okay, well then what was the next major event that happened in your life? And we ask that question, we want the dates. We want explanations, right? But mind you, what you're doing when you're collecting the dates as well, you don't want a gap. You want everything to flow. So if I came out of school in 04, but then I don't start my work history or I don't have a good work history that I even start talking about until 2010, well, what happened in those 6 years? Right? Corey mentioned earlier the education, the different things, maybe that changes someone's perspective. And then I mentioned, typically you won't unless something major has happened in that time frame. Well, this life story, what did we just ask? What's another major event that happened? So in that 6-year span that they didn't give you, what could have been there? Oh, I traveled to Europe, for 2 years. So I wasn't really working, so I didn't think that it would be relevant. No, it's definitely relevant because now it lets me know that you have a different perspective on things, right? I was a stay-at-home parent, and as a stay-at-home parent, you know, based upon our household, I wasn't going to work during that time frame. Okay. Now we can see what they've done afterwards, but you don't want to let a gap go through, even though it may not be a major event in their life. You want to ask about that time. Asking about that time frame will fill in those gaps, but just like Raleigh said, it will make sure that what they've given you thus far is not a lie, right? Now, how far do we go through the life story, through their personal journey? How far are we going? We really want to bring it up to present day, right? We want to go from the time that they finish their education up until present day. Getting that information will help you cement, one, how they've shown up throughout their entire life. What you're going to start seeing is, hey, in school, I was valedictorian. When I took my first job, I got the fastest promotion. As a matter of fact, I didn't use mine. So came out as a marketing major in college. The way that I finished off the last semester, we were graded on a curve. The curve that we were graded on, I was the top of that curve. I excelled so much that I had to have meetings with the department chair to figure out what I wanted to do because no other student would graduate from the marketing department based upon where my grade was at the moment. No one was that close. So now I had to figure out what was I going to do. Did I want to be the jerk who was like, all right, you're not going to graduate. It is what it is. Or how could I pull everyone else up? So I started hosting my own study sessions and bringing people in and letting them see the work that I was putting in and why I was coming up with the results I was getting to have my marketing results be so much better than everyone else's. By doing that, now the entire class gets to go through and graduate. And now there's a partnership that was formed, right? So now how does that transition when I go into the working world? So now I got the fastest promotion when I was inside of Wells Fargo, the fastest promotion at that time to management in that entire region. Why? Because I understood the background, I understood the work that needed to be done, and I comprehended. So it made it very easy for me to jump in and keep going to the next level. So what you're seeing from me is this is how I continue to show up, right? And in the roles I went in, I wanted to be in a management role. I got to help lead and guide people. But what role am I doing today? Right? That's how you continuously see that I show up. So if you're going through someone's life story, you're going to start to see the same thing. Conversely, using me as another example, sitting behind a desk and doing accounting work. Oh, I know how to do it. It's not where I shine. So what you also see in that life story is I'm probably not going to talk about that much except where you're asking this question. What disappointments did you have? Oh man, well, you know, when I was there, I did have to spend a lot of time behind the desk, and as much as I wanted to interact with people, I wasn't doing it face to face. I had to do it all via email, and that just doesn't suit me. I need to be able to meet with them and connect with them. You will see that over and over again as you go through that life story. That's that value. That's what Riley's talking about. This is how they truly show up. That gives you way more information than what you're seeing on the bullet points they have under their resume, right? But now also, I say about a lot of things, I'm going back to not just fact check, but to look and see, right? So if you go through my history, right, where I was at Wells Fargo, I'm going to have bullet points that talk about the highlights that I did when I was there. If I didn't have those, then the question I would immediately ask is, hey, just clarity, it looks like when you're at Wells, I didn't see that you reached any benchmarks or milestones. So tell me about some highs that you had there to help pull those in. Let's dig into this story a little bit more to get some more insight from that candidate. All right. So we've gone through, remember, every stage, red light, green light. Is this a candidate that I want to proceed with? Is it a candidate that I'm saying, we're not going to go any further. I've heard enough. Let's wash our hands and be done, right? We're still in the midst of the second interview, right? In this second in-person interview, we're going to flip the flip chart. Now we're going into the motivation. Now this motivational, this is going to be key. This is page 29. I really enjoy the motivational almost as much as everyone else loves doing the life story. My mind, you look at my KPA, I am high on optimism. I love thinking about the future. I love thinking about what's to come. And the one thing about the motivational, the goal of this is to uncover their core culture and how they think the future dimensions of their life will be like, right? So when you're sitting down with the motivational, remind you, you're still sitting in that flip chart. You have the different colors, they're still sitting in front of it. And now we're digging in, we're making this transition and we're gonna say, hey, all right, it was great hearing about your life story. And I really feel like I have a great connection with you and where you come from. But now I want to transition and start talking about the future and what that would what that would look like for you. So you're going to set up your flip chart. You're going to draw basically a large plus sign, making 4 squares on your flip chart. We're going to start with the same 2 categories, which is going to be job and money on your first 2 boxes. Why job and money? Because traditionally that's the first answer that most people give. And instead of waiting for them to sit there and think about it for 5 minutes, we're going to prompt that conversation ahead of time. Why job? Because if they are hired with you, the question we're going to ask them is, in 5 years, if you had a truly successful career, what would that look like? What would that look like in terms of your job, right? What would you have to say? What would have to happen for you to say that this has been an awesome transition? And as they start giving you the answer, you're writing down, right in that job category, right? We're going to want to dig in, ask additional questions to pull out and make sure, remember, you've cast a big vision. You want somebody who can grow within your world. So now think about how this motivation aligns up. You want somebody who can grow within the organization that you have. Is your organization big enough based upon where their 5-year goal is, right? We talk about thinking big, so we want someone who thinks big as well. We want to hear where they want to be. You'd be amazed at some of the things that come out. There have been times that I've got all the way to this motivation and realized that everything that you said right now sounds great, but your motivational definitely doesn't put us there, right? True story. Real estate agent, been relatively successful. He wants to make a transition in his business, right? So he thinks he's going to join with a powerhouse, right? I'm going to join there. They're going to make it. That's just a conversation I had with Dave just last night. I'm going to join this large team because I think it's going to make it easier for me to do more business and be able to get to the point that I can retire and not go forward. So digging through their motivational, in 5 years from now, you're telling me that you want to be retired and you want to get residual income for you to get there. But what they didn't mention, and now what's starting to show up, is that they're not willing to work anymore. They're actually looking for a plan that lets them get out of the business and still have income coming in. So now if you're hiring for a new buyer's agent, is this going to be the person that you want to bring in? You're looking at their 5 years goals, you're looking at yours, you're trying to be here, they're trying to be there. Is that a match? We can get a red light based on where they want to be in their future. They may show up right now today for you. But in the next year, you're going to be in the same boat, probably in a worse boat, because now you have to figure out a retirement plan for somebody that you never even thought that was an option because your business didn't have anybody retiring in the next 5 to 10 years, right? So this motivational is key because it's pulling that information out, right? The money aspect. Same question. In 5 years, what we need to see from the money aspect for you to say that life has been awesome? The number that they give, can your organization provide that? Do you have enough opportunity for them to get there, right? And as they go through, you're asking these questions, you're digging deep. You want them to expand their thought process, right? So we talk about the fears that we had earlier, right? The size of our organization, the need to know and have everything right now, the compensation structure. Well, right now, the process that this candidate has gone through, they've gone through a process where, one, you've helped them self-discover who they truly are. They're excited about that. The second part of that first interview was going through the normal interview questions, thought process. They probably won't think that was memorable at all, should be told. But now they went through the life story. You basically told them you're writing your autobiography. They've got to think about different aspects of their lives, how they've shown up. They probably, their chest is sticking out a little bit. They see bravado because they've had a great past. And now it's standing out there. And now you get to show them. You know how you show up for them? You show up for them because you're getting to let them see what their future could be like. You've walked and let them walk through their path. And now you're holding their hand. You're asking, in 5 years, things look awesome. How did we get here? What did it look like? What needed to happen for you to say in 5 years you've reached your financial goal? Guess what's going on in their mind at that time frame? They're attaching their future goals, their future desires with you and your business. You've helped them self-discover. Why wouldn't you be able to help them get to the next level? So now you have them connected in. So does the size of your organization matter now? They're not thinking of that because they connected with you. The more time they spend with you, the more they trust you. The more they trust you, the more they tell you. The more they tell you, the more they feel they belong. And if they're going through that process, now they can start to see themselves either building in your organization, making it larger, getting it to the size that they need it to be. Need to have everything right now. To be able to hire that exact person, you've had the tools to be able to get through. And depending on what you're hiring for, remember, we've already went through our intangibles of what we need to have for this person to come in. That job description that you built out, that's essentially starting your 30, 60, 90 of what role they need to do within your organization. You built that out for you more than you built it for them, so you know exactly what they're coming in to do. So now they can see that things are in line to where I know where I'm needed and what I'm gonna help out this organization. That compensation aspect, you're now letting me see what's possible in the future. And if I trust you to that nature, compensation is going to be a different conversation than it would be with somebody who's proven talent, who's already coming in like, look, you know, I've done this job, don't even go through this, give me X amount and we're ready to go. This becomes a much different conversation. So this is what this motivation will go through. And this is why I enjoy it so much, because I can tie this into everything else. And now I can sell that vision. My optimism gets to kick in, right? All right. So we're right back to it. We're going right back to our groups. We're going to work on the motivational. So we're on page 30. We're going to walk through the scripts. We're going to ask the questions for questions 1, 2, 3, and 4. Whoever got to ask the questions during the life story, we're going to switch and let the opposite person ask the questions for the motivation. All right, I'm going to break us out into our groups. And we'll get about 5 minutes to get everything set up and get started.